Sparks flew last night in a blistering live Fox News exchange when Karoline Leavitt, the youngest ever White House press secretary, clashed with firebrand attorney George Conway in a ferocious war of words that left the nation reeling and the studio in stunned silence. The tension was already brewing before the segment even aired. Producers had prepped the panel for what they expected to be a routine policy debate, but no one foresaw the storm that was about to be unleashed. Cameras were rolling, lights flared on, and seated across from each other, Karoline Leavitt and George Conway were poised, like flint and steel, waiting for the spark. George struck first. Without so much as a courteous preamble, he launched into a venom-laced tirade not about policy, but about character. His target wasn't just Karoline. It was her boss, and more explosively, Donald Trump's marriage. "What we are seeing," Conway began, voice sharp, barely concealing contempt, "is a facade, a manufactured fantasy. The idea that Donald and Melania share anything beyond mutual disdain is laughable. This marriage is a cold business transaction, an image to maintain. You don't need to be a lawyer to see it. Just look at how often they don't even make eye contact. It's not a partnership, it's a performance, and frankly, a bad one." Gasps echoed lightly from off-camera. Even the host momentarily raised an eyebrow. Conway wasn't finished. And let's not pretend Karoline is anything more than an ornamental figure installed to keep the illusion alive. She's a decorative mouthpiece, parroting lines she didn't write, standing in for a man who can't speak without tripping over his own lies. You can change the messenger, but it's the same poison. She's not leading, she's leashed. The moment froze. Karoline sat motionless, her face unreadable. The silence was suffocating, until she leaned forward. "I don't think your hatred for Donald Trump should give you permission to rewrite reality," she said coolly, voice steady, controlled. "You're not criticizing his policies. You're speculating about his marriage like a tabloid columnist. That's beneath you. Or at least, I thought it was." Conway chuckled bitterly, but Karoline didn't pause. "And as for me, I speak for the administration because I believe in it. You can't dismiss me as a puppet just because you can't argue against the policies I defend. I earned this position. I speak to the American people every day, and they're tired of elitist tantrums masquerading as insight." A hush fell over the room, interrupted only by the ticking of the studio clock. Conway's smirk evaporated. He shifted in his seat. "Let's not pretend you weren't picked for the optics, Karoline," he shot back. "Young, blonde, media-friendly, and loyal to a fault. That's what Trump needed. Not a press secretary, a mascot." That hit hard, and Karoline let it hang. She looked directly at him, then addressed the camera instead. "You know, this isn't about me or my appearance. This is about the left's obsession with tearing down anyone who dares to challenge them. George wants to dismantle anything connected to Trump, even if it means attacking women in public roles. I won't apologize for standing where I stand." A murmur stirred behind the camera. The air was getting hotter. Conway leaned forward, his voice rising. "You're not being attacked because you're a woman. You're being called out because you enable a corrupt system. You don't get to hide behind identity when you're defending a man who's done more to divide this country than unify it." "And you expect applause for that?" Karoline cut in immediately. "No, I don't expect applause, but I won't sit silently while you smear everyone who disagrees with your crusade. You pretend to speak truth to power, but all you're doing is shouting down anyone who's not reading from your script." The host tried to interject, but it was no use. George's tone was now incendiary. "You're not even old enough to remember what integrity looks like in the White House. You don't know how it used to be before this circus, before the grifting, the nepotism, the narcissism. You were still in high school when Donald Trump started tearing this country apart." Karoline's reply was razor sharp. "And maybe that's why I see things clearly, because I'm not jaded by decades of political rot. I grew up watching this country get talked down, divided, hollowed out by the very people who now pretend to be its moral compass. Trump didn't break America. He just revealed how broken it already was. The heat between them was now volcanic. Conway was visibly clenching his jaw, his eyes flaring. "You're part of the problem, Karoline," he hissed. "You're the smiling face of authoritarianism, and history will remember that." Karoline, refusing to flinch, spoke clearly, unfazed. "History won't be written by bitter men who couldn't handle losing control." The studio lights flickered, slightly as if feeding off the electric energy. The host made another attempt to cut in, but neither of them acknowledged it. The verbal blows were relentless now. "You're complicit," Conway roared. "You can put on pearls and smile, but you're defending a man who called war heroes losers, who cozied up to dictators, who built his empire on lies and broken promises." Karoline responded without raising her voice. "America isn't looking for perfection. It's looking for someone who will fight for them. You might not like the style, but millions of Americans felt heard for the first time under this president. And that scares you." Conway slammed his palm on the table, jolting his microphone. "You're gaslighting the country. This isn't leadership, it's performance. And you're just another actor." Karoline simply shook her head, slowly. "Then I'd rather be an actor fighting for the people than a critic screaming from the balcony." The moment held. And then George Conway stood up. He ripped off his microphone, muttered something beneath his breath, something the host scrambled to mute, and stormed off the set. The camera zoomed in on Karoline's face. Calm, composed, steely-eyed, and Fox News erupted into chaos. Producers scrambled behind the glass, barking instructions, their voices bleeding into each other over headsets. A floor manager waved frantically for the studio lights to dim, but the host, visibly rattled, was frozen, still mid-sentence when Conway's chair sat conspicuously empty. The live feed had caught every moment. No cuts, no filter, no saving. "Throw!" Within seconds, phones began vibrating across the room. Twitter was on fire. Screens filled with side-by-side comparisons of Karoline's poised stare against Conway's furious departure. Some called it a meltdown, others a long-overdue confrontation. But the narrative had already started to harden. Karoline hadn't just held her own. She'd dominated. She removed her earpiece slowly as the segment transitioned to an unplanned commercial reel hastily inserted to regain control. But Karoline wasn't done. As producers rushed onto the floor, offering reassurances or scrambling apologies, she stood, brushing off imaginary dust from her blazer sleeve, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. "I want to go." "Back on," she said coolly, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "Let's finish this." "You've already won the segment," a producer said, equal parts relieved and stunned. "You don't need to go back out there." Karoline didn't even glance at him. "I'm not finished." Across the studio, screens were already replaying Conway's walkout in slow motion. No one had expected this level of combustion. This wasn't political theater. This was a raw detonation between two factions of a fractured country, embodied in one fiery confrontation. By the time Karoline was back on camera, alone now, the energy had shifted. She looked directly into the lens. "What you just saw wasn't a debate. It was a man unraveling," she said, hands resting on the desk, firm and unmoving. "That's what happens when someone's worldview is so steeped in bitterness. There's no room for facts, only fury." Clips of her speech began circulating even before she finished speaking. No edits, no cuts. Just the unshakable calm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't mention Conway's name again. She didn't have to. Outside the walls of the studio, the firestorm was well underway. Social media split into factions. Hashtags exploded. Karoline crushed it. Conway meltdown. Puppet no more. Conservative influencers latched onto the footage, like vultures on fresh kill. Karoline, they said, had done what few in the movement had dared to: face George Conway head-on and win. But not everyone was applauding. Within the hour, Conway was already on MSNBC, seated next to a sympathetic anchor, visibly flushed but feigning composure. He waved away the incident as a publicity stunt, framing Karoline as a pre-programmed mannequin, reciting Trump talking points with Stepford precision. "She's part of the same machinery that got us here in the first place," he said. "She's not a voice, she's an echo." But the damage was done. He wasn't reclaiming the moment, he was chasing it. Back at the White House, word traveled fast. Trump himself, insiders claimed, was elated. Karoline's phone buzzed with messages from cabinet members, lawmakers, staffers. Some were shocked, others thrilled. All of them knew what had just happened. She hadn't just survived the fire, she'd burned through it, and yet behind the celebration, a new current of tension was building. Not from the left, from within. Later that night, conservative commentator and longtime Trump ally Laura Hathaway went live on her own show with a cryptic remark that caught attention immediately. "Karoline's moment was compelling," she said, "but we should remember, this movement isn't about personalities. It's about principles. It's not our job to fight their culture wars with our own media stunts." The dig was subtle, but not hard to decipher. Whispers had already begun among party strategists who viewed Karoline's rising star as both an asset and a threat. Too confident, too composed, too independent, and worst of all, too visible. As the broadcast continued, callers chimed in, some defending Karoline as a bold new face of the conservative movement, others warning that her media presence was starting to overshadow the president's own. In the coming days, the network scheduled follow-up panels, each more combative than the last, attempting to recreate the spark of the Conway clash. Karoline was invited back, but this time she noticed a shift. The questions were sharper, the tone more measured. Some anchors smiled too politely, others didn't smile at all. One particularly icy segment came from a panel discussion with Randall Blake, a known populist hardliner who threw a veiled accusation at Karoline live on air. "Some of us didn't come to this fight to build personal brands," he said, not looking directly at her. "We came to serve the country, not ourselves." Karoline met his stare with silence, then spoke clearly. "Serving the country means telling the truth when it's hardest. I didn't come here to blend in. I came here to speak for the people who are tired of being spoken down to, by the left, and by people who pretend they're on our side." The studio buzzed again. Another viral moment. Another shot fired, not at the opposition, but within the trenches of her own movement. Karoline was no longer just a press secretary. She was becoming something else, something harder to control, and not everyone liked that. By the end of the week, the backlash had started to simmer. Op-eds appeared in conservative outlets questioning her approach, speculating whether she was distracting from the real issues. Rumors floated that some senior aides were uncomfortable with her growing presence in media. A leaked email from a congressional communications director referred to her as the next Meghan McCain. But even her critics couldn't deny one thing: she had the people's attention. And so did the confrontation that started it all. Clips of Conway slamming his hand, Karoline's unwavering stare, the final walkout. All of it was now legend among right-wing circles and a new rallying point for young conservatives. College groups began sharing her sound bites. Fundraisers invoked her words. Memes were everywhere. Yet through it all, Karoline remained unfazed, until an unmarked envelope landed on her desk. No return address, no name. Inside, a single sheet of paper, just one sentence. "You won the battle on TV. Let's see how you handle the war behind the curtain." She read it once. Then she folded it, placed it in her drawer, and dialed her chief of staff. "Book me for next Thursday," she said. "I want to go back on air." Karoline didn't hesitate. The ink on that anonymous note wasn't even dry before her mind was already 2 moves ahead. She knew exactly what it meant. The next ambush wouldn't come from an opponent like George. Conway, too predictable, too out in the open. The real danger was quieter, subtler, wrapped in the smiles of supposed allies who clapped for her on television and whispered about her behind closed doors. That Thursday she walked into the studio, without fanfare, declining the offer of a stylist, makeup team, even the usual notes from comms. She didn't need polish. She needed clarity. Something about the envelope, the note, the timing. It all signaled a shift. The knives weren't just out. They were aimed directly at her back. Fox had slotted her into a new debate format. 3-on-1. Balanced, the producer called it. Karoline wasn't surprised. On the panel was Randall Blake, again, joined by conservative columnist Madeleine Kerr, known for dressing criticism as concern, and former Congressman Dennis Lawton, a man whose resume read like a playbook of establishment conservatism. All three wore the same expression as she took her seat. Tight-lipped smiles, rehearsed friendliness, hollow courtesy. They didn't wait long. The host opened with a question about Trump's latest rally, but Madeleine steered the conversation. Immediately. "Before we talk policy," she said with her trademark faux politeness, "I think it's important we reflect on last week's confrontation. Karoline, while many saw your performance as strong, others are concerned it signaled a dangerous level of personalization in our messaging. This isn't supposed to be about personalities. Remember?" Karoline nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch just a beat longer than comfort allowed. "You mean the personality of a woman who won't be shouted down?" she said, tone measured. "Or the personality of a man who lost control on national television?" Madeleine blinked but didn't flinch. "I mean the risk of making yourself the story. Some might say that moment became more about you than the message." "That's convenient," Karoline replied, turning toward her fully now. "Because when men raise their voices on television, they're passionate. But when I defend myself from an unprovoked character attack, it's suddenly too personal." Randall jumped in, hands folded like a disappointed uncle. "Karoline, we all admire your tenacity, but leadership means knowing when to step back. You're rising fast, but rising too fast makes you a lightning rod. The movement can't afford distractions right now." Karoline stared at him for a long moment, then leaned forward slightly, voice even lower. "Distraction is what they call it when they can't control the conversation." Dennis Lawton cleared his throat, ready to bring the hammer down. "I've been in this party 30 years. I've seen what happens when people mistake camera time for influence. The media will build you up just to watch you fall. If you want to last, you do well to remember whose name is on the ticket, not yours." That was the moment. Karoline could have let it slide, could have smiled, deflected, played the good soldier, but she didn't come here to play a part. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," she said calmly. "But let's be honest, some of you are nervous because I don't need your permission to be heard." Madeleine stiffened. Lawton frowned. Randall narrowed his eyes. Karoline turned to the camera again. "I'm here because the American people deserve someone who won't fold under pressure, who won't back down when the attacks get personal, and who understands that real leadership doesn't come with an expiration date stamped by party elders." The tension was palpable. The host, now sweating lightly, attempted to pivot. "Okay, let's shift gears to immigration." But Lawton wasn't done. "You talk like you've got the weight of the movement on your shoulders," he sneered. "You've been in that office for what, a year? You haven't earned that voice. You've been handed a spotlight and you're mistaking it for a platform." Karoline didn't blink. "I was handed responsibility, not a spotlight. The platform? I built that the moment I refused to stay silent." Then she dropped the hammer. "You call it a distraction. But if standing my ground rattles the old guard, maybe it's not me who's misreading the moment. Maybe it's time we stop pretending that the only voices that matter are the ones who've been talking for decades without listening. That line hit hard. Even the studio crew froze. Madeline quickly tried to soften the moment. Karoline, no one is saying you shouldn't have a voice. But you are, Karoline cut in. You just want it to sound like yours. The segment ended not with applause, but with a smoldering silence. Everyone could feel what had happened. This wasn't just another debate. This was a fracture, an open, public break between the rising voice of a new generation and the cautious, curated messaging of the old one. When the lights dimmed, no one stood to shake her hand. Outside the studio, the backlash was immediate. Conservative media outlets began publishing anonymous quotes from senior party insiders questioning her professional maturity. One headline read, Karoline Leavitt, voice of a generation or reckless upstart. Political talk shows spent hours dissecting her every word, some accusing her of ambition, others of arrogance. But her supporters? They were louder. Thousands of tweets poured in calling her unafraid, the future, the right's answer to AOC with backbone. Independent voters who rarely engaged in political television clips were reposting her confrontation, with the three conservative figures calling it real and refreshing. Then came the podcast invitations, the rallies, the college speaking tours, and, inevitably, the threats. Her team tightened security. Anonymous messages became more frequent, some mocking her, some threatening. One email simply read, "You're not built for this. You'll burn out like the rest." She didn't flinch. Behind the scenes, the White House tried to play neutral. Trump released a short statement praising Karoline's composure and strength, but noticeably avoided referencing the growing tension between her and key Republican figures. Leavitt didn't press for more. She understood the game. She was in it now, but she was done being a pawn. Back at her office that evening, her chief of staff entered quietly. "You're trending again," he said, holding out his phone. Karoline looked at the screen. Her latest moment had already hit 5 million views. "Let them talk," she said. "I've got something bigger planned." The chief of staff hesitated. "You mean the summit?" "No," she replied. "I'm going to New York." He blinked. "To meet with who?" Karoline smiled coldly. The room went still. Her chief of staff blinked again, slower this time, as if saying the name had shifted gravity. "You're serious?" Karoline leaned back in her chair, hands folded across her lap. "Dead serious." The message in that envelope, the veiled threat, the smirk hidden behind its typed words. It hadn't come from a stranger. It was personal, precise, meant to rattle her. And no one had more motive, more opportunity, or more reason to claw back the narrative than George Conway. He hadn't recovered from the public humiliation. His allies were circling, trying to reframe him as a victim of political theater, and she knew the only way to kill a ghost was to drag it into daylight. So she called his team. They didn't hesitate. It was billed as a reconciliation dialogue for broadcast on a major Manhattan political affairs program. A neutral set. No Fox News handlers. No Trump advisors in her ear. Just Karoline and Conway, live, unmoderated, prime time. He had the home field advantage. The studio was his turf. The hosts leaned his way, and the producers, though professional, made no effort to hide where their sympathies lay. The set was darker, more minimalist. Fewer glitzy lights, more sharp shadows. It looked more like a tribunal than a talk show. She arrived precisely on time. Black blazer, no makeup team, no entourage. She walked past producers whispering in corners, ignored the sideways glances from interns, and stepped onto the stage as if she owned it. Conway was already seated. He looked up with that same sneer from the Fox News showdown. Except this time, there was something new behind it. Something studied. He didn't underestimate her now. He hated that he couldn't. Karoline sat opposite him. No handshake, no small talk. Just two chairs, two microphones, and one cold silence waiting to be broken. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1, live. The host greeted them briskly and then vanished into the backdrop, leaving the camera to feast on the tension between them. George Conway spoke first. "You've made quite the name for yourself," he said with that smug, lawyerly cadence. "Congratulations. You turned a tantrum into a brand." Karoline tilted her head, unimpressed. "You stormed off national television because someone disagreed with you. If that's tantrum, you might want to revisit your own greatest hits." George ignored the jab. "You've become very good at deflecting. That's what this White House does best. But you still haven't answered the core question I raised the first time. Why should the American people trust someone who's built her entire identity on defending a man with none?" Karoline didn't blink. "They should trust me because I don't fold when people like you try to silence me with theatrics disguised as intellect. You want to talk about trust? You sold yours when you chose bitterness over principle. You didn't just turn on Trump. You made a career out of tearing down anyone who didn't." George's lips twitched into a forced smile. "So now disagreeing with a president makes me the enemy of the people?" "No," she said, voice steady. "Weaponizing your vendetta to smear anyone in his orbit makes you dangerous." He sat forward. "I speak out because I still believe in the country he hijacked." She matched his movement. "No. You speak out because he beat the people you backed. And now, instead of reckoning with your failure, you hurl grenades and call it courage." George raised his eyebrows. "You really think you've got this figured out, don't you? You think you're the voice of some silent majority. But you're a product, Karoline. They built you to fit a moment, and when that moment's over, they'll shelve you." She didn't flinch. "Then let's see who's still standing after the moment passes." That line cracked through the studio. There was a pause, brief but thick. George shifted. He hadn't expected her to come straight at him with this kind of force. "Not here? Not now?" He tried another tack. "I wonder if Melania would thank you for defending her marriage like it's your own," he said with a razor-thin grin. "Or do you speak for her too now?" Karoline's eyes narrowed. "You leave her out of this." "Why?" he said, voice rising. "You were more than happy to bring her up when it suited your defense." "I didn't dissect her life to score points," she snapped. "You don't get to moralize from your high chair while digging into a woman you've never met. That's not commentary. That's cowardice." The air turned thick. The studio lights suddenly felt hotter. George's nostrils flared. "I will not be lectured by someone who has never had to stand for anything beyond a press podium." Karoline leaned in, her voice low and sharp. "I stand before millions of Americans every single day. I face the cameras. I take the heat. I don't hide behind pundit panels and anonymous columns," he interrupted. "You toe the line. You recite. You don't think." Karoline smiled coldly. Says the man who spent 4 years trying to tweet his way into relevance while the country moved on without him. George's expression hardened. "You want the truth?" he said, voice cracking slightly. "You're just another disposable name in Trump's orbit. A flash. He'll move on, and you'll be forgotten." Karoline's response was brutal. "If I'm forgotten tomorrow, at least I can say I didn't build my legacy on bitterness and jealousy. You're not remembered because you were right. You're remembered because you were loud." The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker in George's eyes, a loss of footing, a flash of anger. He didn't respond. He couldn't. The oxygen was gone. The host, finally stepping in after a solid minute of electric silence, thanked them both and wrapped the segment. The lights dimmed. Karoline stood. George remained seated, staring off camera. He didn't offer a goodbye. Not this time. Karoline exited the studio through a side hallway, her phone already lighting up with incoming messages. Some were calling it the rematch of the decade. Others said it was more than a political debate. It was a reckoning. But before she could step into the car waiting outside, her phone rang. "Unknown number," she answered. A gravelly voice, male, calm but curt. "You're making enemies faster than we expected. That's dangerous." She didn't respond. The voice continued. "If you keep going like this, you won't just have Conway to worry about. You'll have everyone." Click. She lowered the phone, exhaled slowly, and stepped into the car. They wanted her to stop. She'd barely started. As the door shut behind her, the city peeled away through the window like a film reel. Towers, lights, shadows, and stories passing her by. New York was never still. But tonight, something in the air felt unusually alert, like the whole machine was watching her now. Not just political operatives and media strategists, but the machinery behind them, the unspoken architecture of power that whispered warnings through burner phones and anonymous notes. But Karoline wasn't listening anymore. That call, the veiled threat, "You'll have everyone." It didn't rattle her. It clarified everything. For weeks, she'd been navigating the battlefield with caution, playing chess while others played war. That was over. She didn't want to outmaneuver them anymore. She wanted to expose them. The next morning, Karoline returned to D.C. ahead of schedule. Her team had barely caught up with her at the airport before she gave the order. Cancel all public appearances for the next 48 hours. No interviews, no panels, no press briefings. She needed to act fast, and she needed to act smart. She convened a private meeting inside her office with only her chief of staff, a trusted legal aide, and a comms director who'd earned her loyalty in the campaign trenches. She laid out what she knew: a coordinated effort to discredit her, pressure from inside the party, and growing signs of sabotage masquerading as concern. "But we don't have proof," her legal aide warned. "All we have are threats and rumors. We can't move on shadows." Karoline stared out the window for a long moment before turning back. "Then we'll make them show their faces." By the end of the day, her office released a statement. Karoline would be addressing the nation from the White House briefing room in 24 hours. No networks were given exclusivity. No topics were announced. Just one line. "She will speak. You will want to hear it." The internet exploded. Conservative insiders scrambled to predict whether this would be a resignation, a rebranding, or a rebellion. George Conway reappeared on cable that night, mocking the move as theatrical self-promotion. But by the time Karoline stepped up to the podium the next evening, the room was full, standing room only. Every network, every outlet, every whisperer of power was there, waiting to see what she would say. She didn't begin with a prepared statement. She didn't thank anyone for coming. She didn't smile. "I've spent the past month being told who I am. By allies, by enemies, by the media, by people who've never spent a day serving the public, but who seem to believe their version of me should matter more than my work." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "I've been told I'm too loud, too ambitious, too confident, too young. I've been told to slow down, to stay in line, to wait my turn. I've been threatened anonymously. I've been warned by cowards who won't show their faces. And I've been called a puppet, a flash of shutters, a murmur." She didn't stop. "But I am not here because of permission. I am here because the American people are tired of waiting. For leaders who never arrive. Tired of party insiders protecting their turf instead of the country. Tired of voices being drowned by process." She pulled out the envelope, the one that had landed on her desk days earlier. This arrived with no return address, just a warning. "You won the battle on TV. Let's see how you handle the war behind the curtain." She held it up. "Whoever sent this, let me make something very clear. I don't rattle. I don't back down. And I don't answer to shadows." Now, the room was locked in. She placed the envelope down, carefully. "Many of you expected me to come up here today and play defense, to clarify my comments, To apologize to colleagues I've made uncomfortable. I won't. Caroline's tone changed. Firmer, lower, cutting. This is a movement, not a monarchy. And if the only way to survive in this party is to play small, while power brokers rig the game behind the scenes, then I don't want survival. I want reform. She took a slow breath. So here's what's going to happen. I'm not stepping down. I'm stepping forward. I'm launching a new national initiative, one that bypasses party bottlenecks and speaks directly to the people. It'll focus on empowering young conservatives, holding corrupt officials accountable, and ending the culture of intimidation within our own ranks. Gasps, audible now. And for those who think this is political suicide, maybe you're right. But I'd rather go down swinging than stand still while everything we say we stand for rots from the inside. The room erupted. Not applause. Not yet. Just noise. Reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking, phones ringing. She held firm until the noise died, then delivered her closing line with precision. This isn't a press secretary talking. This is a citizen who's done being polite. Then she walked off the podium. No handlers, no follow-ups, just purpose. Over the next 48 hours, the story went global. Networks replayed the speech in full. Clips of the envelope line became a viral moment. College students started chanting her name at political rallies. The movement she spoke of? It started forming that night. Some called it a stunt. Others called it political suicide. But something changed. She'd broken ranks and survived. Within weeks, members of Congress began publicly supporting her initiative. Conservative think tanks who once dismissed her began extending invitations. Even skeptical centrists admitted she had reignited a dormant flame of civic confidence. And George Conway? He disappeared from the spotlight. No more late-night segments. No op-eds. No public rebuttals. He'd lost twice. And this time, there was no comeback. Karoline knew the fight wasn't over. There would be more attacks, more warnings. The party would test her, the media would twist her, and not everyone would rally behind her. But that was fine. She hadn't come this far to blend in. She stood alone for now, but not quietly, and not for long. Because in a world built on performance, her refusal to play the role was the most dangerous act of all. She'd faced the camera, the critics, and the cowards, and walked out stronger. The puppet label? Shattered. The movement? Awake. And Karoline Leavitt, once underestimated, now stood where few dared to stand. Not behind anyone, but ahead.